how can there be any discrepancy within consciousness with regard to the primacy of our identity? Because it doesn't matter how on fire I was last Thursday, doesn't matter how much we speak about it, unless it becomes our second nature, or rather even first nature, and we cannot bend the laws of grammar, all this will remain simply as an idea. And we do feel this grip of being whom we identify with, and it will be not correct to say that that is not our experience, right? Or is there something that seems as so? Let's ponder on it a little bit. Just as an example, simple visual example. Imagine you have a lamp, a light, right? And something like this traditional cover. And imagine that cover is made of dark material, dark fabric or something. Whatever. Dark, quite opaque. Not entirely, but quite opaque. And then we begin to pierce with the needle, right? Just making holes there, right? Many holes with the needle. There'll be more light coming out, right? From the perspective of each individual piercing, it would appear as if that is the property of the light of that particular hole that been made. But we know that it's the light coming from the lamp. The light is coming from one source of light. Doesn't matter how many holes we made there. And maybe we made like 1 million holes, you know. Let's just stretch our imagination. We've been given quite a room to play. A large lamp and a large cover. 2 millions, 5 millions. Simple example of how that autonomy of each individual piercing may be a mistaken identity of the light coming, of light belonging just to that pierced, whatever that is being pierced. There's only one source of light. In the same way, there's only one source of light. There's only one light of consciousness. Only one light of awareness. And that light of consciousness simply illumines everything. Absolutely everything. Within and without. Within and without. What do we mean by that? Within and without. Without, as simply as that, as the light of the sun. And we have spoken about it. Light of the sun itself, as that photonic emission, right, is illumined or empowered, empowered by that light which is beyond the register of the human eye, beyond the register of the human retina. And within, as the working of this organism, absolutely all functioning of this organism being illumined by that same light of same consciousness, a light of the same awareness. So how can there be a possibility that somehow that light is being abstracted to its own brilliance on the account of this total identification with the temporal reality? And this is what we have given an example last time as the ocean being arrested in a drop. And it's a very classical example. In Sufi poetry you will find that, in the expositions of the various teachers, throughout various times. And it's a kind of an apt example. How can the ocean be arrested in a drop? So there is this understanding that there is only one I as the centrality of every experience. Everything that comes next to it molds or colors that experience. Whatever we put next to the I am so-and-so, becomes so-and-so. And this we could understand also from the point of view of the utter fluidity within consciousness. It takes any shape, absolutely any shape, instantaneously. And it is actually experientially available. You can actually experience that at a certain point in your meditative unfoldment, in your sadhana. And it's especially available, this experience, in the early phases of awakening, and that shift is dramatic, is when we literally experience this flow within as a molten gold. I'm not talking about the anatomy of the spirit, of the life force as Kundalini rising up the spinal column here. I'm just talking about that literally perceiving the light of consciousness within in a state of fluidity as a golden light, which literally instantaneously takes any form, instantaneously. And when that happens, wherever our attention goes there, momentarily, in a split second, in 1,000th of a second, we can have an acute vision and understanding of anything that comes into the focal point of our awareness. In other words, we can know anything by virtue of simply our consciousness being focused on any particular phenomena. Because it is fluid, it is in that molten state. It is in a state of potentiality, in a state of pure potentiality. It's in a molten state of pure potentiality. Consciousness operates in this body as prana. And prana is that vehicle. It's literally that link. It's universally agreed. All systems of Indian philosophy, or all various traditions that were born in the Indian subcontinent, may differ and may argue to specifics, but that concept of prana is universally understood, and there is this agreement. Prana as that literally, that life force. Not just life force as that physical vitality. Prana here is that universal force as well. And the acute example, or immediate example, of how universal prana becomes individual prana, or how that universal life force becomes individualized when we observe that in the process of breathing. Those of you who remember when we did this meditation based on breathing, that air, as soon as it enters our nostrils, as soon as the air is drawn in, that air which was out there suddenly becomes the air which ignites all physiological, neurophysiological functioning, because breath is that spontaneous master. I'm saying spontaneous master is because it's all done from that level, from that absolute effortless level. And the breathing is something we have to do. As soon as we come into this life, there's this breathing. And until we breathe our last. So even when we view this physiology from this metaphysical point of view, from the metaphysical perspective, it is very clear that it is empowered throughout by the same awareness, by the same light of consciousness, through the instrumentality of prana, through the instrumentality of this cosmic breath. And we can draw many parallels, as many parallels as we want, with any spiritual traditions that are out there. All of them would have to speak about that, would have to address that. Qi, Qi, in China or Japan, in respective traditions. It's all about that. In Taoistic literature you will find that. The breath of Christ, you'll find that in Christianity. That literally the meaning of that life-giving prana, it's the breath of Christ. But the only difference here is that the breath of Christ literally have been given that transmission, that awakening. Inhaling the breath of Christ is that literally the transmission of grace, that power that awakens our consciousness from dormancy. So back to the relationship between I, as the supreme I, as that identity, universal identity, and this temporal me. And we will speak about it now also from practical perspective as well, from practical point of view. So, and since we just mentioned Christianity and the teachings of Christ, it would be appropriate to bring that line, right? That which we will bring forth will save us, right? To be more precise, that which you will bring forth will save you, and that which you will not bring forth will destroy you. Kind of enigmatic line. What does it really mean? What are the implications and what are the real meaning of these utterings, of these words? Perhaps here Christ addressing precisely that relationship of the temporal identity with universal identity. The self from the capital S with the self from the lowercase, as have been spoken about in the Bhagavad Gita, in another great scripture, where that dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna is precisely the exemplification of that. It's the dialogue of the higher self with the me here. There are many different levels, of course, many different layers we can apply to that scripture and interpret that scripture from. But if we want to look at it from that ultimate perspective, it is the dialogue of the divine with that temporal manifestation. Hence it is known as the Gita, the song of the Lord, literally. It is the song of the Lord each of us is here to hear. Sooner or later that Lord of the song will put everything and quiet everything so that the Lord can enjoy its own harmony again, just as it is within this body. So this very line, that which you will bring forth will save you. And that which you will not bring forth will destroy you. How come this me can have such a grip on that omnipotent magnanimity of consciousness? We'll leave it for a moment. Okay? The question is being asked, we'll leave it for a moment. We'll leave this whole perspective of universal identity of the universal I, and speak from a more practical perspective of literally separating the two. And this is very important. This is perhaps why so many teachers emphasize and have been emphasizing working on the ego, the role of the ego in modern spirituality, because somehow they felt it is the area that needs to be addressed, maybe directly from their own experience, maybe this is the way they've arrived to that understanding. And although there have to be a very careful deciphering made to decipher really what is actually happening, so that we do not create an unnecessary battle with that which is actually fictitious by its very nature. Because a lot of energy can be spent by putting an effort or picking up a fight where there's no need to fight. For instance, cream is a good product of milk, right? Especially if you're lacto-vegetarian, right? If you're not a fanatic vegan who says that ban all these dairy products, which I sometimes plead that the whole cultures that actually lived on dairy products, like Aryans and Indians, in Central Asia. My ancestors lived on milk and dairy products for thousands of years. So turning them into vegetarian, into vegans, it's a bit unfair. So cream is that wonderful product. If milk is wholesome, good. All you need to do is to put it on the shelf, and by morning or a few hours, it will generate a nice, good, thick layer of cream. This cream is tasty. We can enjoy it, but we cannot fry anything on it. Right? It's just good to put it on a toast, right? With honey. Or dip some blueberries in it, right? In order to fry something, we need to beat that cream. In other words, we need to churn it. And I remember my mother used to make her own butter by simply churning it. Not that it wasn't available in the shops, don't get me wrong, I wasn't brought up in a village, I was brought up in a city, but my mother preferred to have her own butter, handmade, especially she knew where she would buy the milk and the cream. So churning the cream before it turns into butter, it's a very interesting process, and I've done it myself sometimes. When I would visit my mom, I would give her a hand only to regret it, because then the wrist is completely numb. I don't know how she used to do that. But what happens really is that water, that fluid that was there, simply starts to separate. And we end up with just that. We end up with pure butter. What was cream becomes butter. Then this butter also traditionally was prepared further, and we have this clarified butter, right? And clarified butter is very healthy for you, very good. It has lots of healing properties. It's actually a medicine in its own right, let alone when it is mixed with appropriate herbs. It's good to fry on it because it can withstand very high temperatures. And nutritional properties are not destroyed, so forth and forth. And it's the only other ingredient that known to us that does not go bad with age. In other words, just like honey, there are no processes that can destroy it if we preserve it absolutely dry, if we create conditions. So this in itself tells us about certain qualities. And clarified butter is just that, just heating it until there's sediment falls on the bottom, and we again this process of separation. We separate that what was in the butter, and we end up with clarified butter, ghee, worthy for oblations. And that's what indeed Vedic culture uses, ghee, in very many ceremonial oblations, from pouring it over the lingas and over the statues of the deities, as well as sprinkling it into the fire, and there are many, many different rituals. But above all else, Krishna used to steal and eat of it aplenty. And I love ghee myself. In this house we eat a lot. So what is this whole thing about? Why do I talk about this process? Well, it's a little bit like that with that ego business. It's literally, something needs to create a cream, right? Whatever we milk in the process, in this life, has to mature into that rich layering. In other words, the milk has to get ready. Something has to mature. That maturity is literally a ripening. A ripening of this individuality. A ripening of this, what is being so wonderfully savored, selfishly as yet, enjoying it fully, but savored that life just for myself. There is a lot of wisdom in that alone. And this is why I always remind that those who want to realize themselves in this lifetime, they need to make sure that actually, from the standpoint of view of experience, there have to be enough of that cream to start with. If it's too thin, skimmed over, what are we going to beat into something qualitative here? What are we going to make butter so that it can be heated? Heated and turned into literally that golden light of our own consciousness. For that reason, the encouragement is to first find out who are we on this level. Who are we on this level? What is my individuality here? What is this actually happening here and now? Before we can become so generous as to trade it for the ultimate reality of our being. It has many, many reasons, of which we will talk if you would like to, why it is so. Why cannot we just abandon or simply forsake or say, jump and I will fly? Why cannot we just jump out of ourselves and become who we are on that ultimate plane? Not even plane, simply as it is. So there's no planes anymore. Why? We will talk about it separately. But to continue with this analogy of beating the cream into the batter and then further clarifying it, it is very much separating that what is ready and ripe to be separated. So we can separate what is secondary, what is just that, let's say, there is even a term, I don't know, in England, in English language, in Russian, there is a specific term for that water. that comes out from beating of the cream into a butter.
Buttermilk. Isn't it just buttermilk?
Buttermilk, maybe. But that's what it is. This continuous and continued separation is important. And now I would like to bring our attention to the scriptures that I've mentioned, and the Bhagavad Gita in particular. The very structure of the Bhagavad Gita is precisely in that. The structure of the Gita unfolds first to separate the self from the self. To separate the self from the capital, the self as the ultimate, and the self as just this temporarily manifesting reality, which usurped for the time being the glory of the self, pocketed the experience and enjoying its glory in ignorance. That separation is a necessary process, without which we cannot really truly progress in a spiritual path. In other words, this is where we are invited to work with. And that separation is precisely the separation of that what we bring forth from that which can destroy us. And yet, it's not as straightforward as just to say, kill your ego, or down with your ego, and all there is the self. Because ego is not just a flat piece of paper in which consciousness wrapped itself. There are dimensionality to the way the self expresses itself and experiencing itself. And this is where the juice of it. And this is what I invite you to ponder and dwell into and understand it properly. So that A, you don't put unnecessary fight where there is no need for fight, and at the same time, you also put an emphasis and attention to where it needs to be.